So with the environment, I had the general plan of doing almost like the atmosphere of like an alien planet, just the very tops of it with only like stone pillars showing, nothing else really, and like a very dark, almost vacant, desolate area, something that would give that sort of vibe of just nothingness and just eerie feeling. And I think with the final outcome, it actually turned out quite well with that. It looked very, well, everything I described is everything I wanted it to be, really. And I believe that I'm quite content with how it turned out. I think the environment I really like. The assets, I would have used pre-made ones to try and speed up the process of it. However, for exactly what I wanted, I couldn't find anything. Whenever I searched with like rock pillar or like rock formation, it literally just gave me like Roman pillars. So I had to go and create those by hand, which was a bit annoying because that slowed down the process by quite a bit. But in the end, it was pretty fine. When I was actually creating the environment, obviously I had my fog and my lighting and everything, and then the assets that I made. But what I did was go into the foliage tool and basically just like scattered about the rocks all over like a plane, and then just hid the plane at the very end of it. I believe that it truly gave that feel of like this almost just nothingness vibe. Towards, I don't know, the midway point of the environment though, I asked the tutor and a few other people of sort of like how it was looking, and I got the general consensus that it was very boring and bland, which was rather irritating to try and work around because that is what I wanted. I wanted it to be a very desolate planet, and I don't like, if you were to make, say, a desert environment, how do you make that interesting? You don't, it's a desert. However, in the end I did compromise and managed to get like, it doesn't massively make sense, but like chains and like cogs and gears, like suspended, falling out of the clouds. Again, it's not necessarily meant to like mean anything. However, it does just add that almost interest to it. And I do think it also helped add to the alien vibe of how nothing really made sense. It was very much just there and looked quite strange because of it. And in the end, I believe that worked out perfectly fine. Again, there was no really rhyme or reason to it. It was very much just there for the sake of being there, but it really did help add to that very strange, eerie, alien feeling that I was going for. I think, like I said, asset turned out very well, the environment turned out very well. I think if I was to change one thing, I wouldn't have spent so much time on the rocks themselves. I definitely probably would have had to make them myself again, but I wouldn't have tried to perfect them as much, because in the end they would have just been hidden by the fog, and were hidden by the fog. However, again, not much I can change about that, and I also think I probably would have gone on with a little more of a clear plan, but I wouldn't know that it would have just been boring. I kind of intended it to be a fairly desolate place, so having to change that around partway through was a little bit of a hiccup, but not too much of one, which is fine, I think. The atmosphere, like the lighting, I think was fairly easy to do. It's just getting the right colours and sort of what sort of time of day you wanted it to be. And same with the fog, getting the right just attributes and everything. But considering that I was just going for a very dusty, foggy, grimy look, I just went for like a brown, orangey texture with light coming through, which was fairly simple to do. Creating the actual light atmosphere itself was really easy, and I think it turned out fairly well as well. One of the main, I don't want to say issues, weird things that I had to come up with was with the almost like cogs and chains falling out of the air. They initially just looked like they were just there. They were just sat there with like almost no reason, and in the end I added another piece of fog but then flipped it so that then they were almost falling out of the fog generating from them, which in the end I believe worked out quite well. Again, there was no way of them truly being suspended there, but it looked better than them just randomly floating. It was them at least being within fog and atmosphere, floating that way, which is something, I suppose. For the concept art for it, what I ended up doing was going into Blender and just creating like a load of rectangles over like a general area, and then I went into Photoshop and got a picture of it and just went and drew over the details, which again, fairly easy. It's just fog and grey rocks pretty much, and a PNG of the spaceship. But the asset was very much meant to be there so that I could have the spaceship nestled inside of it. But I believe that my concepts pretty much showed exactly what I wanted to give off. And that's precisely what they did, I suppose. If I was to come back and do this project again, I'd go for the same sort of desolate feel, but because I wouldn't have been doing the spaceship, I would have done a much more like temple or something for it. As I was making the temple, I probably would have done a lot more like a desert with maybe like bones and stuff about, but with the same sort of foggy atmosphere. I very much wanted to keep in line with that almost like dusty, foggy, desolate, nothing about feel. Whether I would have done that the same way with like the top part of an environment or not, I don't know. However, I think if I was to do the exact same project again, it would have had a similar outcome, because I don't know, it's how I would have done about it anyway, and I'm quite content about that.